Hi everybody. It's Sunday, and so I'm here to just give you our usual Sunday introduction and summary of what we did last time and what we're doing this time. Sorry, I have a cat helping. So first of all, thank you for sending your research proposals. I really enjoyed reading them and finding out a little bit more about your plans for the research project. And they look good, and now the next step will be finding sources. Which we'll talk about a little bit more later, and I'll also send you a news forum about that. But I'm happy that you're really kind of running the gamut in the research projects. Lots and lots of different subjects, so they'll be very interesting for me to read, and I hope they'll be interesting for you to write. I think they will be. So this week is a writing week, and you'll be writing about the readings that you probably completed last week from Margot de Mello. Everything from Margot de Mello, both the required reading and the recommended reading, were from her this week. And the first one, the required reading, was on the domestication of animals. The next one was on the pet animal, and the next one was on animal-assisted activities. And since a number of you are writing about, animal-assisted activities, this would be a good chapter to look closely at, and also to look at the bibliography that de Mello includes at the end, since that will help you direct you to good sources. I wanted, though, to take a moment to think about a few of the discussion questions and how you might want to focus your responses for this week. And I'm going to start with the chapter on the domestication of animals, and a few of the questions that I think might be most fruitful for you to examine. The first one is really a question that you would probably want to answer no matter what other question you were answering if you were going to use this as your focal point for the response. And that is, what single event occurring approximately 10,000 years ago had such a vast effect on the course of human history? Now, I think you can guess what that event is, and obviously it will have to do with the domestication of animals. But I want you to maybe think about a couple of others too. And one of them is about that domestication process. Right? What is so interesting about that process? And so both interesting but also perhaps problematic. And the question is, what traits in a non-human animal are encouraged in the domestication of animals in human culture? And what traits in a non-human animal make it an unlikely candidate for domestication in human culture? So first of all, right, it's a question about what animals in some senses get selected for that process of domestication. Why are they selected? And of course, there is a degree of anthropocentrism, right, in this selection. But it's an interesting question to consider, right? Because surely we live with a certain number of animals, but we also live around a certain number of animals. For example, where I am, right, there are many deer, right? But we don't think about domesticating deer, even though in many ways, right, they're really they might appear to be domesticatable animals, right? But so they're living among us, but not really with us. Why not? Right? Why are some animals domesticated and some animals are not? And another question related to that is the process of domestication, right? How does that process happen? What are the many different events in that process? How do both non-human animals and humans change in the process of the domestication of animals? Right, so because this is a course not just on animals and not just on people, but on their relations to each other, I think that's a fascinating question, right? We tend to think of the domestication of animals as simply a one-way street, right? We domesticate them, and then they are kind of our servants. But what happens to us, right, also in the process of domestication? And then I also wanted to just point you to the more personal ending of this chapter, Chapter 5 in de Mello, where Molly Mullins writes an essay called Coming to Animals. And it's very much a personal reflection on the origins and influences of her research. And while most of you probably are not going to become ethologists, right, you are here for a reason, right? You're here because you've chosen a vocation to work towards. And if you're interested in it, I would accept this as extra credit. Right? Consider composing an essay in the style, right, or at least in the mood of Molly Mullins here, talking about what it is that drew you into the particular field of study that you've chosen. I think it can be an interesting experience to do that kind of essay, a very reflective experience, and not a bad one to do when you're beginning really your preparation to go into that field. Okay, now the next reading from DeMello was about pets. And I think this might be one of the more controversial readings for many of us. And I certainly felt it myself as somebody who has had lived among animals and with animals for a very, very long time. But I think it's an important chapter, and it's important to be conscious of what our relationships with our pets are really about. And so the first thing that DeMello does is to try to define what a pet is, right? And how is that category of animals constructed, right? So pets are a kind of subset of other kinds of animals. They're not a species, right? But they are a kind of subset of this larger set of animals. And how does a pet differ from any other kind of non-human animal? This is obviously related in part to domestication, but not entirely. It's also, I think, a really good idea to look closely, to trace the history of pet keeping from its beginnings to the 21st century, which DeMello does, obviously, in very brief form here. But it's a fascinating history. And to think about how pet keeping, pet owning, is not just something that humans do, right, but that humans do under particular conditions. Some of those conditions might have to do with social class. Some of those conditions might have to do with gender. What are those conditions of pet keeping? And why do we need to think about pet keeping as something historical rather than something simply a kind of psychological affinity with animals? Following that vein, you might want to look at the question which says, review several current theories concerning the reasons why we keep pets. Why do we keep them now? Right? Why did we keep them in the past? Why do we keep them now? How is the idea of the pet evolving all the time? And you might also want to think about your own, if you have pets or animals, you might want to think about Michael Fox's 4 categories of pet-owner relationships and ask yourselves, what category does your relationship fall into? That could make a very interesting response. I wanted to just point out, because a couple of you are working on pets in populations that are more marginal, including the homeless. And there is some research on this subject, and my question 9 for this chapter addresses that. But it also, this would be a wonderful chapter to look at the bibliography again if you are looking at pets and marginal populations, the relationship with those populations. And I think it's a great question, incidentally, but I think you'll find some very good research sources here. Finally, a lot of you are writing about pet therapy and service animals. And so certainly DeMello's chapter, Animal-Assisted Activities, would be a wonderful place for you to begin your research, and also, of course, a wonderful place to look at her bibliography to see what works might be immediately important to your own research. So certainly one of the things you'd want to think about is the history of animal-assisted activities. It actually has, we tend to think of this as a very 20th and 21st century phenomenon, but there's a very long history to animal-assisted activities, and trace that history if you can, and think about how it has changed. You might also want to think about the various forms, right? A lot of you are writing about animals who are therapy animals, but of course, as we know, right, there are many, many different types of therapy animals, or many different classifications for service animals. And so it's not as if just because you have a service animal doesn't mean that that animal knows everything that another service animal knows, or that you're using it in the same way. There's a tremendous variety and diversity, right, in how service animals are trained and what they do. And certainly we can think about the benefits to humans of having service animals. Those have been quite well documented. A much less documented question, though, is how are these animal assistants, right, how do they benefit from their relationship to us? Do they benefit from their relationship to us? It's a hard question to even ask, right? Because we like to believe they are benefiting in some way. But how do they benefit? And what's the nature of the bond between the service animal and the person it is assisting? Okay. As always, I am looking forward to your responses. And I'm really looking forward, now that you have chosen your research topics, think about, not every reading may be relevant to you, but try to think about how the readings may be relevant to you. And jot down some notes even as you're writing to remind yourself later. Now, a couple more words about the research process. You're going to start really in earnest now working on your research papers. And the first place to start that is, of course, in finding sources. Sources are going to be tremendously important, and you certainly want to have scholarly sources, right? Academic and scholarly sources. What does that mean? Most immediately, right, it means expanding your research process beyond Google, right? You can Google things, that's fine, we all do it. But what you're finding, right, on Google may or may not be what we would call scholarly, right, or academic. So we're going to really, really need to move from that easy kind of broad Google searching to very in-depth sort of scholarly searching. And to do that means using the resources of the Duville Library. And you can do that from home, actually, where you are, or you can do that if you're on campus. Of course, it's pretty easy if you're on campus just to walk into the library and to start looking at their online catalog and the online databases. But you still have to know, especially with the databases, how to really use those databases effectively. Some of you may have done this in the past, but for some of you, this research process may be very, very new. So I want to make two recommendations, and sort of strong recommendations. And I'll put these in a news forum post as well, just in case everybody doesn't see this video. First of all, I want you to consult research librarians. Right? Research librarians are there to help you, and they know how to find sources that will be appropriate for your projects quickly and easily. You can even email them. If you go to the library's page, right, if you're on the Duville website and you choose a library, you'll get to the library's homepage. And from that page, you have a lot of options. You can find books, you can find articles, you can do a Spartan search, which is a sort of broad general search, but can be very helpful. And you can also email a research librarian. Try doing that. Tell them what you're working on, what kind of a class you're taking, what your research subject is, and what you need to find, which would be 3 to 5 very good scholarly sources, and they will help you to find them. I also want you to know how to do this, because this class, although this class is looking at human-animal relationships, right, all research uses, not all, but a lot of research uses the same kinds of tools, right, the same kinds of knowledge. So if you know how to research your subject here, you're going to know how to research subjects in your field, and that process starts now. So I'd like to have a couple of on-campus meetings with you if you would like to. Right? If you're feeling insecure about the research process and you want to meet with me, I think that would be a great idea. And I would like to do that this coming week, either on October 14th or on October 15th. On October 14th, I'm going to set aside the hours of 2:30 to 4:30 to meet with students from English 112, just to show you how the databases work, right? How you can find materials. So if you would like to see me, please let me know. And let me know. We're going to work in small groups. I'd rather not have a group of 10, but a group of 5, 4 or 5 is great. And will only take us maybe 20 minutes per group to really go through the research process. But let me know. Let me know if you want to do that, and I will sign you up for a time. If you can't meet on the 14th between 2:30 and 4:30, you'll have another opportunity on October 15th, either in the morning between 9:30 and noon, or in the afternoon between 1:30 and 3:30. So let me know. Again, this information will come to you in the news forum. And maybe before then, right, you could try and see what you find when you search for sources on your own. And then we can build right on what you've done already. All right, well, I look forward to your responses, and I look forward to meeting some of you in person this coming week. Take care.